as always, got to argue with Howard. So enjoy. Thanks, Howard. Over to you.
Excellent, Paul. Thank you very much. And I was talking to Di, and yesterday she had just finished 3 days of training. And I don't know if you guys have ever done 3 days of online training, especially when everyone switches off their cameras. After a while, you start becoming desperate for someone to argue with you, or just to talk to you and discuss and say and have these slides where people can have a discussion. So I would appreciate that. Any comments other than weird ones? That would be fantastic. All right, great. So we now doing for data quality for the data citizens, and I think that from this expectation, remember last week we spoke predominantly about the data manager focusing on data expectations. So making sure that the organization has a way of voicing their expectations around data. And I believe that the data citizens are the ones that can really help you describe and define what the expectations are. And I don't know about many of you guys who do BI development, who build data products. We spend so much time trying to get the data into the right shape, what they refer to as wrangling and munging data and getting it into an acceptable shape, that by the time we present it, we've really had no time to think about whether the numbers are making sense. And I'm working on a project at the moment, and I'm doing a lot of bordereau submissions, which is insurance compliance reports. And I really work hard just to get the data ready to present, and I present it. And a data citizen or an SME looks at it and says, the numbers are wrong. And I look at the guy and I first of all want to shout and say, what do you mean the numbers are wrong? And he then says, but that doesn't balance to that, it doesn't balance to that. And I keep on saying and trying to get to the point of saying, if only this had been defined up front, if only I knew that when I was bringing the data in or checking for the data, I would be applying these rules. So, and this is specifically talking to JG. JG and I have worked a lot. He does a lot of that analysis and understanding of the data and reading the story about the data, and he can look at the data and say this data doesn't work. But I don't think we've learned, JG, if you would correct me here, I don't think we've properly managed this framework of defining what you expect. And one of my customers has got a real nice term, and she calls it believability. So what is the believability number, or how do we calculate believability of the numbers that you're presenting? That one can take a look at and say that those numbers are reasonable and we're comfortable that you got it right. Or is it always going to be the case if we put the numbers, it goes in front of an SME and they've got all sorts of challenges, and then you start again and you go through the process again. So we need to find a way and plead and beg and almost hand over this responsibility of setting data quality expectations with and getting the data citizen to help set those expectations. And I know also Jan van der Merwe is here. He helped me. I was building a financial market data warehouse. He would look at the numbers and say, I don't believe those either. You know, that doesn't make sense. The nice thing with working with Johan is he could go down to first level principles, down to the accounting, and show that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong. So it's really fantastic to be able to work with people like that. But wouldn't it be better if we could be proactive in defining what our data quality expectations are? And so that's my goal today, and would like to work with you and discuss this with you in terms of how do we ensure that the data citizens have given us the right steer? Because we as IT or as data developers, as data management professionals, we really trying to get the data into the right shape to display it. Our understanding of the believability of the numbers is is minimal initially, but then you start to work it out and you can pick it up after some time. But initially, your believability is really bad and you need help from the data citizen. So that's where we are today, and hopefully we can work out with that. Last week we had this video. I don't want to show it again. It will be available in the slide deck, but just one bad value. Just one bad value when an SME looks at the data set and the numbers that are pivoting or whatever it is, it's just one bad value that the guy says, I don't trust these numbers, they're not right. And it's a very depressing scenario and a very depressing state to be in. I'm going to go through these essential concepts pretty quickly, but I'd just like to remind you of the data citizen, the goals for our data citizen. This is one where I believe the data citizen can really help, is to identify and advocate for opportunities to improve the quality of the data through process and system improvements. They are the ones that will help us increase the value. They are the ones that will impact and understand the impact/risks of poor quality data. I mean, for us, we build the numbers, present them, do some calculations, and put them on the screen. But they will see the impact of those numbers and where it doesn't make any sense. Okay, they will also understand what it's like to present bad data to their managers or to outside people and have them look at it and say, what are you talking about? These numbers don't make any sense. And even the allegation of saying, do you guys really know what you're doing? That's probably the worst impact or the worst feedback that you can get. In some cases, we're fortunate as BI developers or data developers is that we don't really see that. We don't see that type of communication, but the data citizens do. Our life cycle, remember we have this life cycle for data quality. I know Di presented on yesterday. Di, I noticed that you didn't have design and enable on your life cycle. I was interested in that. And that's almost the modeling. And I really liked Di's picture yesterday. So guys, when you see the transcript come out, Di actually put data governance as a band around the data wheel and then put data quality in the middle of the wheel. Yes, Di.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. We really have to begin to standardize. So I would like to include this slide, if that's okay, Howard.
Sure.
As well, yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. And if you guys are interested, and I remember doing it for Pinky, that was at Old Mutual at one stage. She phoned me up and she said, Howard, I'm looking for data lifecycle management. I've been given the task in my organization to do data lifecycle management. And Navigating the Labyrinth had just come out, and Laura Sebastian Coleman had done it for 5 or 6 of the different knowledge areas, and she had done the same diagram but explained how the diagram works for each area. So it is helpful that we map everything back to a standardized diagram. These are the principles. I think they are important, the different areas. Lifecycle management, as I've just been talking about, criticality, critical data elements. We will go into that a lot in a lot more detail for this session. It's really about preventing you from boiling the ocean. Not all the data elements are critical. So, and doing data quality for every single column, every single data set, it doesn't help. You won't get out the door. Prevention of data errors, that's what I'm wanting to do today. I want to focus on getting a steer from my data citizens to ensure that I'm preventing the data errors. Okay, and then systematically enforced, that's another area that we'll do. So it's really helpful that the data citizen shows you how to validate, how to detect these errors, define the business rules, the constraints, and then you put them in. And certainly for BI developers and data engineers, this has got to be built in as part of your business rules engine. And that was something that we were chatting about last night with a guy by the name of Matthew Chisholm. He works for First San Francisco Partners. He's actually built business rules engine, and he's got books in terms of how to put that together so that data citizens can define the data quality rules and the system can execute those data quality rules. similar to a concept of using regular expressions. Okay, so how do we identify data, critical data? These are the different areas that you can look for on critical data. Regulatory reporting, of course, financial reporting, they do very well at this. What are your policies, operations? Master data is always critical, but this is the one I like to focus on is if I look at my business strategy and I look at how we're measuring the business, that's where I really need to have the right level of critical data in there. JG.
Howard, I don't think you can stress that point enough, and maybe how this ties in with the slide prior is when you have a look at this slide, it looks very typical and you can relate to it in terms of a data quality process that you're going to get to through the life cycle of a project. However, all things are not equal when you're in the project and when you're trying to gather the confidence of your business champion, who then has to present it to his constituents. And so for me, that criticality, that critical data element, if you just get one of those and just take that, forget life cycle, forget remediation, forget governance, forget all that stuff, but just literally take criticality and prevention of data errors. You just bring those two together and you get that out. So I feel like we look at this shopping list of things and we go, oh, we'll get to that at the end of the project, but not these are not equal when you're in the project and you're trying to get that. And so I can't agree more with you. The next slide where you go into that green target is not trying to get all these other things right. It's just you getting confidence on that one measure, whether it's revenue, whether it's total number of employees, whether it's
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, JG. But what is important, I think somebody else, JG, you got your hand up. So I think somebody else, what is important is getting a way and a meta database of defining this, right? So we've got to get away from, this is really important, to give me the details of how it's important and how do I check it out. Okay, so these are, just as a refresher, these are the data quality dimensions. And one of the important elements that you need to do is, as JG was saying, what are the key data quality dimensions that you need to implement right now? So of these elements over here, which ones are the most important? Now, I really like this guy, Dan Myers. I presented with him at a conference at EDW. I think JG was there as well. He also presented, and he builds this DQ dimensions, conform DQ dimensions, and he constantly measures the use of dimensions over time. And when he did this presentation, this was from one of his presentations, he was demonstrating the movement of dimensions from 2015 to 2019. So which dimensions were people using at 2015? And there's the blue line. And notice lineage is an interesting one in terms of a data quality dimension. But notice how timeliness has dropped. Over time, people regarded timeliness to be less. So 2019, they were using timeliness less. They increased on their lineage. They decreased on their precision. Okay. And then notice that they went a lot higher on completeness, validity, consistency. Accuracy was always the same. Integrity and accessibility. So it's interesting to see how that's progressed. I did fill in the last year's survey, but I was battling to find it. But it's really interesting to see how these dimensions change over time and what attention people are paying to the data quality dimensions. Okay, so here was an example of the data quality dimensions. I think I spent some time with this last week. I just wanted to share with you, a lot of the times before I saw this diagram, I was dealing with these dimensions in isolation. I didn't realize, and I mean, it always bothered me to say, for example, accuracy and precision. They sort of sound the same thing, right? Especially when you're dealing with a GPS location. How accurate is the location? Well, it's also to do with the precision of the data values. And there's another one in terms of valid values control. So notice that a dimension will interact with other dimensions and other concepts. And then for each one of these concepts, you require a metric. Okay, so data citizens, when you define the fact that you want accuracy, and then you got to tell me whether it's agreeing to the real world or matching to an agreed source, and then what is the metric? Okay, so you've got to explain to me your acceptable metric. Okay, this is the plan, the different plans that we get through in terms of planning the DQ, doing data quality, then doing the check, monitoring against it, and then doing the act. So it's plan, do, check, act in that scenario. Okay, and of course, what's important here is it's cyclic. Okay, don't think you do it once and then it's over. So, and we do that a lot with BI developers when we're building it. We're doing a lot of this checking and validating of our data quality. And when we finished, what happens? If ETL is not built into the process, then data quality is not built into the ETL process with that validation, then it's going to go bad over time. You can bet you. I mean, I can bet you guys that this thing's going to go funny. Okay, then we have the business rules, these different types of rules. So when you get into looking at your critical data and defining the constraints, you're going to be choosing from a set of rules that make sense, and you just have to document what those rules are. Now, there's a lot of examples and sample data that you can build what's called the BRE. You can build it in SQL. You don't have to go and buy the big tools. And the ultimate will be where the data citizen can define the dimensions that they want to do, define the business rules that are going to enforce that expectation, and they should be able to do it in a front end, and your code should be able to execute it. Now, I promise you when you start, you're a long way from that. And this takes time to creep in and get going. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on DQ issues, data profiling, lots of shareware, SQL code, if anyone's interested, that you can profile the data to have a look. And that's certainly what I advise the data citizens is when you set your expectations, go and have a look at your existing data and see what the thresholds are, the min and max values are within that current data set. That will help you. All right, if we go to the activities, I wanted to share this. This was last week in terms of the data manager. Now, when I bring in a data citizen, this is the area that the data citizen plays in. They will also include the critical data, but they're there to identify existing rules and patterns of the data. They're there to identify and prioritize issues that needs to be looked at. And they're also there to prioritize actions based on business impact, right? So as a BI developer, you really don't know that reporting of that number in whatever incorrect format or not to the right level. You don't know the impact that it's going to happen on, and that's where they need to help explain that to you. And then, of course, corrective actions and confirm plan actions. And the data citizen is there from a deliverable point of view. Over and above the data quality expectations is to bring in the recommendations based on root cause analysis of the issues. Okay, so when they see it, and be that on the source system, they will be able to explain to you how to fix these errors and how do we address it. All right, so we did this last time in terms of the data manager. We were managing the trust, and now we want to focus on the expectations or defining the expectations. So I'm fully in agreement with what Paul said in the beginning. Data citizens need to build that expectation and expect trust to come into the data. Okay, they can't sit back and not get involved and then say, look at the data and say it's wrong, please fix it. I promise you the guys who are building it don't really know and can't understand all the different checks and balances and the constraints that the data must be in. And we are so busy fighting with challenges of data that we don't really get to enforce all of the data quality rules when we're doing it. So it is helpful to have a metadata engine or a data quality framework, because that means you can plug it into each BI system and each time you develop it, you should integrate it in the beginning, and you can start getting the data citizen to define it. So we did talk about a data quality strategy, and these are the sort of areas where I believe the data citizen has to take the forefront or the lead on the data quality strategy. Okay, understanding and prioritizing the needs. Okay, so let's look at some examples here. You know, we as developers, we can talk about accuracy, and I'm sure every single one of us who built a data warehouse, we quickly learn how to balance it back to the source system. But is that the need? Is that the data quality need that that the business have on that data, that it balances back to the source system? And I'm sure you guys know, and you've experienced that it's not, you can't always trust what the source system says. There's certain elements that the source system doesn't have. So you're going to introduce dimensions and views on the data, or what one refers to as transaction context. Well, you know, we know the master data and the reference data, and there's a term that Chisholm introduced, which is called transaction structured data. So what is all the data that surrounds the transaction that makes it meaningful to the business? And then they can look at the believability. So it almost deals with all the different things of who, why, where, what. All of those things surround the final number of what the sales was. So for the month of June, in terms of when it was, our sales was this amount, but then you start slicing and dicing across all the different dimensions, the five wives and 2 husbands, and the data citizen needs to prioritize those needs. Okay, it's also data critical to business needs. The IT guys aren't going to get this right. This is where the SMEs and the business define it. Now, of course, this should be described within the data strategy, but data citizens, you are the ones who lead this and inform us what we need to do in this regard. And so we go on to the business rules of data quality. Then we get to the data expectations. Then we get to prioritize and manage issues. Then we get to opportunities for improvement. We then get to monitoring and measuring the data quality, right? So how do we measure our trust in the data? And then finally, there's some level of integration. Now, last night we were talking about how do we deal with some of the data quality issues, and in some cases it can be completely manual. So the data steward that's responsible for the application, he may detect that people are typing in data incorrectly, and they may put in certain controls, and that tends to be the fastest resolution. They put certain controls in, or they ensure that the people that capture the data, they are the ones that understand it best, and they put in some good quality checks within that scenario. So just in terms of looking at, of all these 10 steps, the data citizen, you know, is probably the stakeholder that's going to receive the feedback. They are involved in 8 out of the 10 steps, and they should be leading that. Okay, so I think this is an important realization for the data citizens that are on this call, or people that are demanding, or the consumers of data. You got to play an active role in this data quality process. You can't expect the data management professionals or the developers to give you the right answers. Any comments on that? Any observations? Anyone would like to disagree or question as to, is this what a data citizen should be doing? Everyone.
So I would maybe just I immediately go to the context of the statement is completely true when you're in steady state. But when you're in project, how do you make sure that you've got these parties part of your project? Because they typically don't necessarily come with as part of a data project. So the statement you say, I think, is incredibly valid, but it's where I think some of the tricky parts lies. When you're in a project, these people aren't necessarily part of project scope. And so,
well, that's interesting. You say that. Remember, we spoke about the data quality lifecycle, and upfront, when you are initiating a data product and you've got your plan and design, at that stage, you should be asking what your critical data elements and what your business needs are with respect to that data, JG.
Yeah, I would agree, Howard, but I feel like, I've seen the pain of not doing that. And so that's like a key step. And
no, and you're right. Sometimes we rush. Everything's great. We're going to do a fantastic job. The promises are high. The expectations are even higher. We then see the data and then we realize, oh, we got some problems. Or the Excel spreadsheets that you get from customers don't line up to what you expected. And then your data quality is really low. Now, at that stage, you've got a bit of a challenge because you're presenting data and they're losing confidence in what you presented. And so you then be getting to a reactive mode. So that principle of being proactive disappears if you don't pay some attention to this upfront.
Yeah, I would agree completely, Howard.
So then and JG, I do take your point, especially if you're a contractor or a service provider and you're going in to build it. You probably you don't know as much about those needs, that critical data when you start. But I think sometimes we miss some steps, and so we lose out on identifying it. And this is what I want to do today, is to show you some of the steps that you can put in place, be they reactive or proactive, to get that information out of the SME. And of course, the first thing is to identify who the SME is and who's going to give you that right steer. But I think, JG, you would know that when you, as a service provider, when you go in, you bid for some business, you will quickly determine who is the person that understands that data quickly, and you actually need to go through a data quality assessment with that data citizen.
Absolutely, Howard. Thank you. That's a really key point, that. Thank you.
But interesting to see how much you're responsible for, Di.
Let's unmute first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just this kind of girl old lady sitting in Edinburgh, Scotland. And yeah, I'm a stickler for terminology and stuff. And I've got a note beside me, research data citizens, because data citizens, data consumers, SMEs, maybe you can guide me. Is this the same thing?
Yeah. Di, we have defined our data citizens for all of these discussions to be those people that make use of the data that it is productized by the data management professional. They make use of that data according to the rules defined by the organization. So we use the term citizen to say that you're using data responsibly.
Okay, thank you. Use responsibly. I'm just writing this down. Okay.
So a lot of the times you are using data, and this is where some of the challenges come in. Your use of the data and the insight and decision and what you're trying to understand will determine what data is critical to you. So, for example, if you are in different departments and you're using shared data, you may have a different definition of critical data. So that's where if you take on a data set, as part of helping the people out that are going to deliver the data set to you, you need to define your data quality expectations to them. Okay, so this is an interesting diagram that I've seen work and repeatedly over and over again. Is typically what we start with is a scenario of data quality issues. We then do some form of root cause analysis, and we provide the feedback to data governance. Hopefully, they would then go and ensure that all the standards and methodologies are in place, and then pass some level of authority and responsibility back to the data owners, data stewards, data professionals, to say, with respect to data quality, you have a mandate and you have a responsibility to look after the data quality for a certain subject area or core business concept. And as well, that over and above this, when they start to pick up some challenges that we don't really understand what this definition is of the data and where the data comes from, we would then get a metadata management process going, and we'd implement business glossary and rules. And then there's going to be this feedback and interaction between data quality and metadata to say, you know, if I've got my business rules, then where do they apply, to what data do they apply, and is the meaning correct? And then on this side, we have this concept of data quality expectations with respect to the critical data elements, data issue remediation. So it's issue management and then remediation, and then what are data quality rules? And we're doing this all over and over again, where we're doing root cause analysis and profiling of our data. Okay, so the expectation framework that I've put together is one of, first of all, understanding where you are in terms of your data quality expectation. So let's ignore all of the different aspects of data quality, but just focus on data citizens. How good are you at defining your data quality expectation to the data management professional? So I don't know how many data citizens there are here, and I'm hoping I'm not just picking on JG and Johan, but how good are you at defining your expectations? So if you want to measure it, and maybe I can help you, Johan and JG, why don't you just keep a score, and anybody else, if you can put your hands up who are data citizens, let's see where you are. So the initial phase in terms of a data quality expectation is your reactive, right? So all of your data quality activity is based on when you see an error, okay? And there's no capability for identifying data quality expectations and documenting it, okay? So in initial, we're reactive, we've got no capability, and we don't have our data quality expectations documented. When we're in repeatable, we have a limited anticipation of errors, so we sort of know what they are, and we've articulated them, and we can define simple errors, and we can report on simple errors, i.e. your data hasn't loaded, or you didn't get all the data in, or you're missing the number of rows in your data set. When you get to defined, you've identified and documented the dimensions. Your expectations can be articulated using business rules. So when you say you want a certain level of accuracy and precision on this, how do you document that in a business rule? And then you have the method for assessing the business impact. So can any of you define what the business impact is? And I'm interested to see that Vainant's here, and Vainant and I worked on a data quality, a massive data quality. I think it took 6 months, Vainant, if I'm not wrong.
I think a bit longer, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think, wasn't it, we went through a bit of a hiccup when we tried to translate all these data quality problems into business impact. I don't know if you remember that. We had a bit of a blow up where the business went, there was lots of emotions that went around when we tried to express the business impact. And again, I think it's sometimes we're lacking all of that input from the SMEs as to what the real impact is. So that's an important area where people can tell us what the impact looks like. Any comments from your side, Vainant?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to make, well, currently we're also implementing, MDG massively across a number of instances. And one of the key things here is actually getting that business on your, almost say business on your side.
Yeah.
So it's easier to convey the message in terms of when you start presenting them if there are issues in the data itself and quality is not what was expected, so it's easier to actually get them on board and across the line and starting the journey to improve the data. But yeah, that it's not, yeah, I think to get that buy-in is not always that easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay, so then managed means that you've got it implemented and inspected. The validity is inspected within the process. Okay, so be it application, be it ETL, you're doing validity within the process. And Vainon spoke about MDG, and there's Oracle master data that actually looks at a lot of the cleanliness of the connections to the master data, making sure that you've got good referential integrity. Those things are then picked up at source. Business impact analysis is common. I don't know how many of you guys have done those Fishbone diagrams to do root cause analysis. I'll show you an example. Impact analysis is factored into prioritization. So do we have an impact analysis rating? I found that to be very emotional, this impact, especially if we try to describe what the impact may be. We can look at some numbers and think, oh, you're out by millions, and you may be interpreting incorrectly. And the next one is the DQ assessments are cyclic, so don't think you're just doing it once. You're looking for trends over time. And if you optimize, we've got benchmarks, we've got industry proficiency levels, good stuff done by BCBS 239, where they start defining critical data elements, and you can start looking at these benchmarks at an industry level. And then what you've also got is this baked in statistical process control, which is referred to as SPC. So if my processes are well defined, which they should be, specifically they're done by an application, we define the inputs up front, we should have an expected definition of the outputs, but do we look at the variance of those inputs and outputs? Are we measuring them? So, Johan, I don't know how you guys did. Where do you see yourself on the maturity level within the data that you work with?
Well, actually, fact, we just had a let's call it the red carpet pulled underneath your feed scenario with data quality with this project that they're currently running. That the guys have seriously data quality issues, gaps and things like that, wrong dates and things like that. So from that perspective, for me, as from a project principle, I don't like to say it, but I think the guys are more on the initial level at this point in time.
Yeah. I would say that most of us are sitting there. Anyone sitting higher up? JG, I'm sure you must be around optimized, right? Maybe he's dropped off. Okay. All right. So you need to assess where you are, what your capability is, and then this is what I refer to as a data citizen interview. Look, this may be conducted by a data quality analyst, but I feel that your data citizens are the right people to do this interview. And it starts off with your critical business processes and data issues. What makes this a critical business problem? So what about this data issue that I've raised makes it a critical business problem? It's very helpful to be able to explain that to the person that's implementing the data product, that criticality that you're dealing with. And then what are the impacts? Now, for example, timeliness. And we've noticed an interesting reduction on timeliness. What are the impacts of delivering it late? And I've seen that myself personally, where I haven't been able to deliver a data product that the people can trust. And the data citizen that was reading my data warehouse, they took a look at me and they said, Howard, at this stage, I would much rather get a beating from the customer than present data to him that he doesn't believe. So he actually stopped the deliverable, and we had to deliver it 2-3 days later with the correct data. So at his level, and I must admit, I was unaware of these challenges that they were facing with their customers. And it was a bit of a surprise to me, and it was helpful that I understood that. So how does the business problem relate to data issues? So they got to map it to us to say, this impact that we're facing, this is the data issue that has been caused by. That's where we get into the root cause analysis. How often does the issue occur? How do they recognize the issue? So how did they pick up that they had an issue with the data? That's what I refer to as that believability. they've got that gut feeling on whether they can believe the data or not. Johan, I think you sit with that where you can look at portfolios or you can look at different trade dates and things like that and pick up whether something's going wrong. I think you've been around that area and it takes you quite some time to explain that to the developers, but they need that guidance.
Definitely, and I can share on that now with the guys that we're currently using on this project, that if I put down the time that I've spent on training exercises, it's actually a fact unbelievable. I myself was actually quite shocked.
Yeah, and I think if I remember working with you when we built that financial warehouse, the number of coffees I bought you were many.
I think the company made some serious profits on us, Howard.
I remember Veronica looking at my slips and saying, "What do you do all day?" I said, "I get trained by Johan."
No, but I actually miss those days.
Yeah, and then what are the remediation tasks performed? So for all your critical data elements, for all those things that you're doing, you need to have this checklist of having these interviews with your data citizens, with your SMEs to get this data out so that you can build ways of fixing the problem. Okay. Just as an important definition, guys, you've got to know that this data quality or this critical data element cannot be applied to all of your data elements, the general population. You probably find you're sitting with more than 20,000 data elements. I'd be surprised if you weren't. We then have look at the reduction. So the critical data for line of business. So this is critical business processes. You come down to 2,000, between 2,000 and 3,000. If you can look to the critical data for the enterprise, you're coming down to 400 to 500. That's where we're talking about the business measurement framework. And then you can start focusing on the enterprise critical data and reducing that. Now, these numbers are a whole lot better than the numbers above. And if you don't tackle this and don't get that steer from the enterprise as to what's important, I don't think you'll finish. Okay, so what is the playbook that I've put down? The way that I like to do it is once I've had those interviews and I've got an understanding of maybe the top users, the top consumers, I am expecting that they will be different. I do not expect them all to be the same. I remember also working with Johan where we had 3 different business departments. We had an accounting department, we had a risk department, and we had a trading department. The expectations on quality were quite different across the different areas. So get your DQ dimensions sorted out, get them agreed, understand the granularity that you're going to test at, define the constraints, document the expectations, and then look at your acceptability threshold. Okay, so this is at a high level. This is what you have to do as a data quality analyst in conjunction with the data citizen. You're going to be putting all this stuff together. And I would even suggest that the data quality or the data citizen is the data quality analyst. Yes, whose hand is up? Ah, Debbie.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, I wanted to ask, why do we define acceptability thresholds? Should we not have data that's correct?
Yeah, it's a hard question. Oh, look, it's an easy question, but it's a hard question to convince people that in some cases you're happy to deal with bad data. I know it's one of the ways I relate it to application developers. Is it okay to have some errors in an application? The default expectation is what? Is 100%, right? Is there any user that expects less than 100% quality on their data?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so you would expect that I'm going to have 100% good quality data. I'm going to have 100% error checking, but we know quite a few things for application developers. We have this saying that data citizens, or in some cases they had a more derogatory term. They said fools are ingenious. So it was almost impossible to determine how certain people were going to interact with your system. They'll come up with the most amazing ways of doing it. And then data goes dirty underneath the covers. Data disappears and data gets problematic. So we have to define what is acceptable to us. So what is the level of error that's okay for us, that we can tolerate before we have a problem? And that's a difficult discussion to have with a data citizen or an SME, to say you're only going to get a 70% data quality. And what I like to do is, when they say, no, but we expect this to be perfect, you go and do a profile of the existing data, and we say, well, if you look at this critical data element, or according to this constraint, at the moment, you have a 60% failure rate. Now, so what we can do is we can define this threshold, and typically you define a minimum level where below that we lose, we shouldn't be using the data. And then you can start defining a target. Where would you like to be? Where do you think we should be? Okay, so Debs, that I do battle with that. I do have to spend time explaining to people that I'm not going to build a system that's foolproof.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Di, have you ever built a system that's foolproof?
Wow. I think way back in the early days when things were simpler. Yeah, way back. 1970s, maybe early 70s, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, you know what I believe, that wheel is there for a reason. That if we do the architecture right, the design, the data storage and operations, if we do these things right, then we stand a better chance of data quality.
Yeah, but I
we're
do
not
find
doing it right. Yeah.
I do find that when you're dependent on data coming from customers that are not doing it right, you're just going to be facing challenges.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's bigger than just data management. It's that change management thing.
Yes.
It's enterprise culture. It's a quality approach. Yeah.
And I'm sure you guys are remembering me telling me this, me telling the story to you. Is I went into a big insurance company, and they had 4 or 5 different business units. So they had employee pension funds or employee benefits, and then we had a life, and we had health, and then we had a health area, and then we had so there are 4 different areas, and they were bringing all this data together. And the customer data for employee benefits or the pension was probably the worst customer data that we've seen. And so we initially took a bit of offense to the fact that 80% of their customer IDs were the same. And so we got all uppity and went and had banged on the table and says, guys, how can you give us such rubbish data? This is our business key. If you don't get it right, then we can't do anything. And I still remember today the one SME laughing at me saying, I don't think you have any idea about the pressure that we are under to complete the business process, to get the people transformed from one pension fund to another pension fund, and to get the billing out by the end of the month, that ID numbers just don't have an impact on that. And they were actually typing in their own ID numbers to get the data through and into the system. So it's contextual. What's important to certain people and not important to other people. It's almost as if we should not demand those type of ID numbers. We should rather let them bring in a blank ID number and then work at fulfilling that, than force them to put an ID number in and then they just give us one that's going to pass. So we have to look at that in a way. So here's my playbook. I just wanted to take you through some of the different steps and give you some examples. So we've got to determine the subset. So I've shown you these ones. So which one do you want to focus on? We did talk about what the trends are, but I think you've got to determine within the the data set that you're working on, which one's most important for now. You know, even if you get 3, and the ones that typically they say you start with 6, but the ones I tend to work on is accuracy, completeness, uniqueness that we've got, and in some cases consistency. So these are you got to go through these decisions. You got to go through the difficult discussions and prioritize which ones are important. Then, what is the level of granularity? So I know we spoke about this a little bit with you yesterday, Di, where we said we've got 3 levels to express our business rules. At an attribute level, or what people refer to as a data element, a column. At a data record, that's where we need to look in some cases in terms of a logical consistency. So a city may be 100% correct on its own, but is it correct in terms of the country, in terms of the suburb, in terms of the address? Are all those 5 rows within the record, all those 5 columns within the row, are they correct? And then you have a data set level. So you can define an expectation at a data set level in terms of what is the tolerance for a complete data set. And then you have to find ways of rolling it up, because you'll typically profile at a data element level, and you'll pick up some of the challenges at a grouped column level. But then how do you roll it up to a data set level? So one has to be clear on defining those rules. Okay, then we have to identify the constraints, and we spoke about this in terms of for each one of those dimensions, we bring in the concept and the metric. So we've got to choose between conformance in terms of the definition, value presence and completeness, format compliance, value domain membership, your referential integrity, the ranges of numeric numbers, of dates. Could they be 3 weeks in advance? And I think those always catch me when we deal with certain payments, and they have split payments going along, and you're dealing with payments coming next year and the year after, and you're trying to keep quality on all of those. It makes it quite hard. Then we map conformance, consistency rules. So here are the different constraints that we're using to express those definitions in terms of our expectations. And then we have to do a level of documentation. So this is the type of thing we do, is we have a dimension and a business rule. How do we measure it? And we have to explain that we have to count the number of records where the data is populated and compare it to the total number of records. And here is an example, and this is the way in which we measure it, and you've got to explain to it. And then what we can be doing is having a complete percentage of all the executions and tests that you've performed, and how many did you get wrong and how many did you get right. And then we organize the results and we present it back to them. So this is quite a detailed definition that our data citizens need to go through and explain to us how we need to validate that. And then, of course, we get to what we refer to, or Debbie asked, as our threshold. And here's an example that I presented where I work with fact tables, and then within my dimensions for completeness, I can define and agree what is my minimum level and what is my target level. And so we would then go on from there to say, what do we do across all the different dimensions? And now typically uniqueness, you're pretty sure that you want 100%. And sorry, I didn't fix this up. This target level should be 100%. You don't want to go backwards. So then you would then almost display your data quality within your Power BI. So there should be a tab within your Power BI to explain the DQ dashboard. And you can see here that I've got this set to be the latest ETL run, the latest time that I loaded data, what was the run number, and what was the ETL date. And by fact table, I'm looking at what my error percentages are. Okay. And you'll notice in some cases, I don't have dimensions on these fact tables, so I don't need to worry about it. So in some cases, they're marked as not applicable, and you would have seen that in those previous screenshots. And of course, from here, this would be do I trust the data sufficiently enough to make a decision? Now, let's look at this one in terms of this fact table, which is my border submission. I'm getting 100% across all of these dimensions. So I'm not getting the right geo account. I'm not getting the right functional currency. So the answer would be, please don't make any decisions based on this fact table with these dimensions at this point in time. Okay, so people need to be aware of it. Now, I've seen lots of times where I have to explain to my ETL developers, please don't throw the data away or stop the ETL process. What you need to do is get the numbers in front of the data citizens so that they can understand what's going wrong and they can be the ones that will guide you on fixing the problem. Okay, so it's better that you catch it, you score it, and you mark it and you present it than if you just say, well, it's below the amount, therefore I'm out. Okay, so for example, here I've got 100% the target, and the minimum level was whatever, 70%. So I'm not going to show you the BI report today. At the end, if you don't have the BI report ready, they're going to come back and say you've built a rubbish system. Okay, so this is my trend analysis across the different ETL runs. And for each one of these areas, that's the nice thing about using Power BI and some of the collaboration things. You can actually comment on what changed at these different levels and what caused the deterioration, or what improved, and then what did I deteriorate over time. So you should have comments all the way along to explain the change of your data quality. Okay. And the last thing I wanted to show you was this situation of a fishbone diagram in terms of explaining bad addresses. So you could look at what is the impact that the employees have on a bad address, the lack of standards have, the lack of training, the processes, the timeliness of the integration, and you can put together your Ishikawa fishbone diagram to explain what is happening and why do you have bad addresses. Okay, this is really helpful in doing quite a specific analysis of your challenges that you're facing with data quality issues. Okay, are there any questions?
Howard?
Yes, Paul.
Just probably speaking to Debbie's question, would it be fair to say that the utopia of the 100% is limited to, there's obviously business requirement understanding of this, the citizen understanding of requirements can limit you in being they passing through definitions, requirements, etc. And also, and I understand that data quality should look at systems, but you also are subject to the systems.
Yeah.
And what the systems or applications can and can't do.
Correct.
In an environment previously, for instance, you had to they called them CODs. You'll remember the term.
Yeah.
And they were basically attributes of a booking, giving definition. What is the cost center? Who's what? And depending on the variations of those answers when you made the booking, obviously that went into reporting, and many times it got the combinations were incorrect because the system was limited to how you restrict the combination. So just as a small example, but you are limited to understanding, and you're limited to what the application or system can do when you enter the data. So,
and that's why, remember, Paul, I said one of the things I do is when I interact with a data citizen on defining acceptability thresholds, they tend to give me a threshold, a minimum threshold. Hopefully I've run the profiling on that because I've got that list of critical data elements. And I say, okay, your source system has a threshold of 60% and you're asking for 70%. How am I going to get that? Now, if they can't give you a transformation rule that you can guarantee that you can pick the right CODs, you're never going to be able to improve that number.
100%.
So 100%. That acceptability threshold, it is something that people hate, And they get very frustrated, especially when managers read the reports and they see that there's rubbish in the COTS. They get really upset with you, and especially if they're customers, until you can go and show to them. But you were the guys who were supposed to tell us where in the organization was happening, and you gave us ABC. And I think I even remember doing one of the credit card checks for travel. And one of the elements we got was the guy was buying boerewors at the Lambton meat market. And when they saw that, they freaked. But it was good quality data, but it wasn't what they expected.
Exactly. So that's the difference, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Any other questions, observations? Any data citizens want to help us out?
It's very fascinating to see those thresholds, but how confident are you of those percentages? Like you're 100% confident that the data is 100% accurate or 70% accurate? How accurate are those percentages, or how do you calculate them?
Okay, Reza, I'm just trying to find that. It's in the essential concepts. What you can do, and I can certainly share with you guys some quick SQL scripts that I run to profile my data. Okay, so when I profile my data across these critical data elements, I can pick up the number of nulls, the min and max, and look at the outliers. I can also pick up the lengths. I can pick up frequency distributions, format issues, non-conformance, unexpected. And there's a series of these different checks that you can analyze a specific column or a series of columns at a row level. And you can say, this is what your current data is. So are you confident that, let's say, for example, you have a 60% formatting or consistency of format? How can you improve it? Or is 60% okay for you to make decisions on that data set, or do you have to do something to fix it? Does that answer your question, Reza?
Yeah, I see a little bit. Yeah, how you do it. That's brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah. So you really got to sit with the data and listen to what the data is telling you and how that SME or the data citizen make the right choice. And then what I like to do is I go red, like you saw on that one fact table, to say I'm not adhering to your minimum thresholds. Now, sorry, buddy, you make these decisions at your own risk. It's not me as a developer, and I can show you where all the data is bad. You can click on that thing, and then you can go to the record where the data is bad, and you can look at it, and that then brings in that confidence.
Yeah, that would be a real eye-opener for many people, I suppose, and would
Yes.
help them understand why progress is so slow and so forth. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Jeffrey, would you like to ask a question? Checking all components of addresses in entirety is also profound. Yeah, I actually did that. I had a scenario where I had to build a master data and a DQ for travel in terms of where they were traveling to, the cities that they were going to, and the address of the hotels they were staying in. And the way I managed to get it right was that it was really hard to have a data set across the world that would validate this. And Paul can bear testimony to this. You get the data back, and the guy's flown anywhere. He's flown to the middle of China. He's gone into Taiwan, anywhere in the world these guys can fly to. So what I did was I actually, to improve my vetting, I actually built a link to Google to see if I could find the address. And so what I would do is, as I got the addresses, I would then go to Google, and Google would come back to me with a lat long. And if he couldn't find it, I'd say, I've got an error with his data. And that was, so the problem with addresses is it's really hard to look at the quality on a single line. It's easy to break it up, but then then it's hard to look at the logical consistency across them all. Interestingly enough, I found a Pretoria in the Eastern Cape. I was completely unaware of it. I initially marked it as invalid. Then when I asked Google, it came back and said, here it is, here are the lats and longs, and it was fantastic to see that change that came about. So you've got to find ways of vetting, scrubbing address data and things like that. It's sometimes I like to say maybe you should hand it over to a GPS company that like Checks for Africa that will help you resolve some of those issues.
Sure. No, thank you. Thank you for providing a way of checking the logical consistency, because I didn't check all those things together. So
yes,
yes,
you can come up with some surprises when you have to look at a few issues that are correct across 4 or 5 columns and not just one. And addresses the easy example. What I found in insurance, you look at all sorts of things of where was the policy created, where the person lives, what was the original currency, and you've got to look at all of these things together and say, well, is that an acceptable set of values that someone wouldn't say this risk is unacceptable or it's incorrect? Okay, Debbie, no serious question from you?
From me?
Yes.
I've had my question. How do we spread the word that data quality needs to be focused on more?
Yeah, what I like to do, devs, is if I can look at the business impacts and the problems they're having with data at the moment, and relate to that in terms of saying this impact is at this level, it's a high risk, and if I apply good data quality, I can tell you that you've got a problem with your reports even before you get your reports. That's how when we become proactive, that's when they start to see the value of data quality. But it takes time and it takes experience for them to want to invest in it. And then you've got to look for your quick wins where you can actually show them very quickly as you load the report, these are the problems you have with data quality, and they start to trust. There's those, what we refer to as believabilities. Look for the believability metrics that you can put on there, and as that believability goes out within a range, what we call reasonableness, then you start flashing the reds all over your data quality dashboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. I'm glad you brought up impact again, because when I was thinking of impact and root cause analysis and the fishbone, in the same way as we kind of go from the effect or the impact to the puddle of data quality issues to the causes and the root causes, and we ask the 5 whys to really get to the root cause, maybe we can do the same thing with the effects. So the effect is, okay, we can contact our customers, and why again? And so why is that? And or not why, maybe, so what's the effect of that?
Yes, Diana.
So drive that forward till you get to the real, and then you can maybe say, okay, here's our ROI. This is where we can get some payback.
Yes, and I was involved in a customer that was battling with the way in which their customers were, or their potential customers were observing them. And some salesperson detected that they were getting some funny feedback. And so they went to a marketing company and they actually asked the marketing company to do a survey. And the common response from their customers, which were outside the organization, was that the data that they are provided is cannot be trusted. Now when the CEO and the CFO heard about this, they nearly freaked. They basically said, we've been shipping these customers because they dealt with the insurance on behalf of their customers, and they were shipping their data, and they didn't believe the data that they were getting. And the CEO and the CFO, the execs, were completely unaware of the challenges that the customers were facing.
Yeah.
It took a marketing company to find out what the problem was.
Mm. And maybe just another comment on addresses. And I know addresses are complex. I've been living in the UK now for 4 years, and during lockdown I've become a big internet shopper, and every parcel gets to me. And I think one of the reasons for that is, and I experienced it about 10 years ago, I was in hospital in the UK, and all I did was type in my postal code.
Yes.
And they pinpointed me to one of 2 houses. Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of technology or definition of data, because it's just a piece of data, absolutely incredible.
Yes. It's phenomenal that, and I was also surprised by that. And you will find that the Brits are quite surprised when you can't give a perfect address.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm.
They don't comprehend that. They're just compared to us. But you are right. It's that postal code which almost will get you into the region of 1 or 2, your house and your neighbors between you. So it's extremely precise.
Yeah. And you know, I travel to the train station quite often. I normally get a taxi, and I just phone up the taxi. They know where I am, you know. They remember me. It's absolutely incredible. And the taxi gets there, and it gets me to the train station or the airport, or So things are changing. And technology is changing, and these new data elements that we're getting will definitely help us. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a comment on the chat by Martiningo. The quality of output depends essentially on the quality of input. 100%. That's critical. So that's where you have to have an acceptability threshold. And it's not obvious to the citizens because they don't really see that data coming in and the extent to which it can be bad. And then it's making them aware of that level. So it is what we did find was we in one of the customers where we had this, when the marketing people went out and they said, the customers don't trust you. We went to the developers, and the developers said, but they're sending us crappy data. Sorry to say that, but if you send us crappy data, well, then we give you crappy data. So they were quite indignant about it. And then what we had to do was go about defining and DQ SLA, that when we received this data from them, we could turn it back and send it back to them. And then some of the reliability and the trust improved that way. So when you're sharing data across organizations, that data sharing agreements is important, and you want to have DQ SLAs based on that. And then specifically, you've got to then define your critical data elements there that you're going to pay attention to, and then reject the data if it's wrong. And that's problematic because then things start to bottleneck and the flows start to become problematic. That is important. Fantastic, guys. Thank you very much. If there's no other question, Johan, anything from your side?
Nothing from our side, Howard. I very much enjoyed your presentation. It spoke quite a lot, so thanks for that. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Corneli. Thank you. Any comments? Anything? Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Howard. Great session.
Paul,
Thanks.
to wrap up.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.